Hi, everybody. So glad to be back here today with my friend Maureen Muldoon. Hi, Maureen. Thanks for agreeing to join me for a conversation today.
Oh, absolutely, Susan. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to hang out with you every time.
So, just in case this particular audience is not familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I think the question I always like to ask you is, how did you go from being a Hollywood actress to a spiritual teacher?
I think the Hollywood actress was my way. I like to say, like, I really loved watching the priests when I was younger and the way that they got to help transform the thinking of a community through sharing stories. And I thought, like, that's what I would like to do. And then I realized I wasn't invited to that party at that time, but we've made great strides. So I looked back on the menu of appropriate ways to share stories for women or girls with body parts that weren't, invited to the party. And I saw actress, and I thought, I can do that. And I kind of fell in love with the idea of being an actress. Now, I was a really shy kid. It was ridiculous that I should have wanted to go into film and TV, but God doesn't call the qualified, God qualifies the called. And
Mm.
so I went, through my own nerves and through my own resistance, and I enjoyed it so much until I began to tell my own stories. And I think part of the ordination of my becoming a spiritual leader was that I needed to be groomed in hearing the truth and speaking the truth and being comfortable with my truth, which I didn't have that prior to going through Hollywood. Like that was my polishing school. And now I have a very keen ear for the truth, so all of that was really helpful and necessary. It wasn't like, I could say like, oh, I shouldn't have gone that. I should have gone right into ministerial school, but actually I couldn't have. I needed to pick up those skills on my way. And I think it was towards the end of my acting career, I started feeling like, when my agent calls me, like I don't want to go on the auditions. I've done everything that I've wanted to do, and I don't know what else is mine to do. Like I literally cut off that idea of ever being a spiritual teacher. Like I'm not even sure that those words are the correct words, but that I wanted to help to shift the consciousness of the world. That sounds like a very big, grandiose thing, but nevertheless, those are the symbols that we have. So but I started doing shows where I was helping women to tell their stories. And every time I did a show like that, I just felt like this was church. Like I felt like how I thought I was supposed to feel when I went to church. Like I was like, the audience was so fed and thrilled, and the people on stage were so fed and thrilled. And it wasn't about like having professionals, it was about like the everyday person on stage sharing their truth, sort of like what you might experience at a 12-step meeting, but maybe with a little bit more polish. And once I got a taste of that, there was no turning back. And I just wanted to have that authentic expression of humanity and divinity. And I wanted not to be a cog in someone else's story. I wanted to help tell my story and help others to tell their story. So that was the natural unfolding of my journey.
Yeah,
Mm,
great.
mm.
So we are broadcasting live on the Course in Miracles page at the moment. So what's your background with A Course in Miracles? What parts that played in your journey?
Yeah, so I first came in contact with the concept of A Course in Miracles when I went to Medjugorje to see the Blessed Mother. So I'm a huge devotee of the Blessed Mother. And I don't apologize for that. It's kind of outside the box of most Course in Miracles conversations, but nevertheless, we have to be true to the grain of our own wood. And so I went to Yugoslavia to see the Blessed Mother. I was raised on the devotions of the Blessed Mother through my own mother. And I was there in Medjugorje, and the message the day that I got there was that the Blessed Mother is weeping and crying, and she's very upset that we're being disposable with our children. This was before I had children, and I raised my hand. And when it came to question time, and the question I asked was, "Does she ever laugh? And if so, what makes her happy?" And I
Mhm.
didn't necessarily get the answer, but except for that this woman, this old woman next to me, looked up at me and she said, "Good question, honey." And that helped me own my own spiritual authority. Like, I could ask a good question. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like a little nothing up here on this hill in the midst of all of these amazing people saying the rosary together. So the next day I came back and another person asked a question. I've told this story quite a bit, but it's my story. So, and he asked, like, does the Blessed Mother suggest any books? And the answer was, oh, her son is writing books with these two therapists in New York City. And this was like 19, my son was born in 91, so it was 1990. And I lived in New York at the time, and I thought, I'm going to find these therapists. I'm going to find these books. I'm going to figure out what this is. And I don't remember the all of the titles, but she said one of them was a song of prayer. So when I got home, I didn't do any of those things. I didn't look for the therapist. I didn't. Instead, I got pregnant, and then I got married, and then I got sober. It was like had a zigzag way to my spirituality. But one day, the book showed up for me, and it was when I was teaching A Course in Miracles. The Song of Prayer came to me, and I didn't know that they were connected. And it's such, for me, when I share that story, it's such like a weird out there woo-woo type of synchronistic story. And yet that's my story. That's how I found A Course in Miracles. And I found A Course in Miracles. That's how I found the Song of Prayer. I found A Course in Miracles because I was in so much grievance and stuck and hung up on a crucifixion due to a divorce. And I was praying for an answer, and that's the one that came to me. And I just started gulping it down like fresh air. And then spitting it out because I didn't have the tolerance for it. And then gulping down more and then spitting it out. Like, I know this is true. I'm not doing it. I know this is true.
That resonates very much with me.
It's like 7 years of like tug of war in my
Yeah.
own mind. And but little by little, nevertheless, the lessons do even
Yeah.
in the space of resistance. So um that's the topic of the conversation that I'll be hosting at Awareness is, how to melt the resistance and move into the flow and recognize that we are in the flow and the ways that we get hung up. So we might help ourselves to eradicate some of that resistance and grievance and unforgivenesses and become more comfortable in the flow. Cindy was talking about that before we even hit record and, how she's just listening. And that is a sure sign that I have slipped into the flow. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So before we talk a little more about what you're going to be presenting at the Awareness Conference this weekend, you did some video commentaries on YouTube on A Course in Miracles.
Mm-hmm.
Is that are they still current, or is that something you still do, or are those?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think I am on lesson 189, and I've been doing them for 7 years. So most YouTubers like spit them out day after day and
In a
just get it
year.
done. But maybe most YouTubers don't have 4 kids and a husband and a whole bunch of other excuses. I don't know, whatever. It's just happening. They're being baked when they're supposed to be baked. They're coming out of the oven when they're supposed to come out of the oven. And I even sometimes I look back in the beginning of those lessons and I think, well, that was good, but I know less now.
Yeah.
So I can let spirit speak even more,
Yeah.
through me. And that's always kind of nice that it's that they're really, yeah. But you know what? I find I make a lot of friends through YouTube. A lot of people reach out and say, "Hey, I really appreciate this," and I've made a lot of friends through YouTube. And the funny thing is, when I first started putting these YouTubes up, people would contact me and I wouldn't know what to do. Like I would literally not respond because I was like, I don't know who they are. It's so silly. And then one day I was like, oh, I'm supposed to have a conversation with them. Like, I know it sounds like basic humanity 101, but I literally I had a block around that. And then I started having normal conversations with people. And just like you and I, like there's this really lovely connections that are made through A Course in Miracles, really beautiful connections made through A Course in Miracles. Yeah.
Yeah. So your session is on Saturday, yes?
Yes.
The
Saturday
awareness
evening.
conference opens on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern and runs all day Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And Maureen's session is Saturday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
And the title of it is Flow as God. I love that. Tell us more about that.
Well, the whole conversation is based on our relationship with our own divinity, and that we begin our awareness of our relationship with our divinity pretty organically. We seem all to go through the same stages. And the first stage could be that we assume we're more of a puddle than a rambling river. And we get stuck in these puddles of separation and separateness. And we live in puddle mentality where we assume that it's all up to us. But you know what happens to a puddle on its own is it eventually dries up or it becomes really stagnant, nasty and kind of gross. We've all been there, stirring in the separation of our own toxicity. And then we began to expand and we, allow fresh water in. And that's when we meet up with other people and we begin to connect. We begin to connect and we make connections, true connections over our understanding of the expression of love that wants to seep through us. And so we begin to make these connections. And so the first or as we crawl out of that puddle mentality, we move into talking about God, and so we find that just like at these conventions that we are meeting up with people and we are drawn to these conversations that make us feel so full because we're talking about God and we're remembering we're not separate. We're not these separate puddles. And for many of us, there is great resistance around talking about God. I had a friend that I um, knew a while back, and when we were running spiritual community together, she told me that in the beginning of running spiritual community, before she got comfortable with it, she lived in this little town, and she was like, as soon as we got into the room, I was like, shut the curtains, don't let anyone know what's going on in here. You know what I mean? Like, we shouldn't be talking about God. And I was like, wow, where did that come from? Where did that resistance come from? Or I'm not worthy to talk about God. And we can see in our, psyche all of the ways that we've been invited not to speak of God. I'm not worthy to gather the breadcrumbs, or we give special people special titles who are going to interpret God for us. That's why it's so lovely to be in a course community course of miracles community, because everyone is a teacher of God. And we all sit knee to knee and eye to eye. And we're all preordained to speak of God. And it doesn't matter what you call God. You could call God, Yahweh, Kuan Yin, Dolores. It doesn't really matter what you call God. But to learn how to speak of God, and that's what we do at these conventions. We begin to speak to each other about God, and that would be moving into like the exchange. And when we get into the exchange, we move out of unforgiveness and into a bit of lightening up, because it does light us up when we speak about God. And then we get to the place where we move into wanting to speak to God. So instead of me and you speaking about God, like we go, you know what? We're like looking at a postcard of the ocean. Like, why don't you and I actually go to the ocean? And so we go, well, how do we do that? Well, we could pray directly to God. Is that appropriate? Well, I don't know. Let's give it a try. We could meditate. Oh, I can't meditate. Meditation's really hard for me. So we have these resistances around speaking to God. And again, we have like special teachers or priests, that popes or whatever that tell us like, let me interpret that for you. And even in our society growing up and before I was born, but they had, the priest not only spoke to God on your behalf, but he made sure that you weren't included by turning his back on you and speaking in Latin. I mean, there's just all of these wonderful ways that he was like, you stay there and let me have my Holy Communion, and you're not included. So we kind of have to move through those old agreements and say, I am worthy to have Holy Communion. I grew up in a Catholic church, and there was many stipulations for you to have Holy Communion, and most of them I did not qualify for. It was like you're supposed to have gone to confession, you're supposed to have no sins, you're supposed to go, and I had many people tell me, you're not supposed to be at Holy Communion. And I would go anyhow. Really ruffle a few feathers. So, but this is just a symbolic ritual of when we say, like, no, I am worthy to go to God, and I will go to the ocean of my own divinity and stand with my toes to the water, and I will allow myself to get comfortable in that authority. And after we find that we are worthy of that, we begin to develop a spiritual practice and a meditation practice, we go, ooh, like that's good stuff. Why was that withheld from me? Why didn't I learn that when I was in kindergarten? So we begin to step deeper and deeper into the ocean. And eventually we become so enthralled with the ocean and so delighted with the ability for this ocean to lift us and to surrender us. And it's almost like our own breath. We get comfortable with our own breath. I once had a friend who had a party down at the beach. I might have told you this story, but I went to her party and I met her. I met this man, and this man was like rolling around in the ocean at where the ocean met the sand. He was like maybe 75 years old, and he was a big man, and he kept just being thrashed up by the ocean and pulled by the ocean and thrashed up by the ocean and pulled. And I was like, what is that person doing? He looked like a fool, but he was having so much fun. And my friend said, that's my dad. And he's playing seaweed. And I was like, how do you play seaweed? She's like, you just act like seaweed and you just let the ocean flip you up and pull you back and flip you up and pull you back. And I stood there staring at him for a long time. And he was having so much fun that I was like, I want to play seaweed. And so I did. And I was like, oh, it's sand everywhere, in every crevice. But it's like, oh, this is really fun to practice, like completely letting go of yourself. And I taught that to my sisters one time when I went on vacation with them. So anytime that we have to make plans, I would say, do you want to go here? Do you want to go here for lunch? They all go, seaweed. It's just like, let it go, be in the flow. Let's see where we show up. And nobody has to have a strong preference or opinion. And when we are seaweed, we find that we are delivered to our most optimal experiences that are most helpful to everyone that we're to be helpful to. You've had that experience, right, Susan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, it's as you said before, the more you get out of the way,
yeah.
the more synchronistic things are, the more helpful things are,
Yeah.
the more the num the number of times I hear people saying, that's exactly what I needed to hear. There's somebody listening to us right now, and
Yeah.
this is exactly what they need to hear. I love
Mm-hmm.
that.
Oh my gosh, yes. And you know what else it is? It's exactly what my own ears need to hear. It's like I often hear myself saying things that I'm like, thank you, whoever said that. Like, that's great. I hope I take my own advice. I have a friend who wrote a song that said, take my advice, I'm not using it.
That's good.
I think when you move closer into the ocean of your own divinity, you do find yourself with an unfurrowed brow and a lighthearted step. And I think it was uh, Gandhi or Deepak Chopra or one of those wise men who said, like, you're reaching enlightenment when less things bother you and there's more synchronicities.
Mm.
So this is what happens when we move into the next level of conscious relationship with our own divinity. And we find ourselves deeper in the ocean, and we are having so much fun in the ocean, like seaweed, that we can't help but call out to everybody who's still on the shore, like, get in the water. It's awesome in here. Like, and so we find ourselves just being like these kind of lighthouses for this light that's moving through us. And it's not to sort of seduce or change, but just to invite, like, come in the water. I want to play with you. You don't need to be on the sand. You don't need to think you're separate. You don't need to have your puddle mentality. And in that moment, that's when we move from talking, about God to talking to God to talking for God. right? And so talking for God is lovely, because we get to, again, like we just talked about, we get to hear God move through us, and we become what the St. Francis prayer has promised us. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there is, discord, let me bring light. Like where there is suffering, let me bring joy. Like, let me just be a channel for whatever you want to flow through me. And it can be kind of scary. So that's why it's nice to move through these aspects of our own relationship. Like, we don't have to jump into the deep end and just start talking for God, because when we do that, we can sometimes be an unhealed healer and say, God said this. And it's like, no, she didn't. Like, that is a total misinterpretation of the situation, and you just are trying to get your own way, Maureen. So we want to go gently into our own divinity so that we don't, as RuPaul says, don't fuck it up. I don't know if you watch RuPaul, best show ever though. Anyhow, so we move into the ocean and we start to speak for God. And then when we allow ourselves to be that's a very joyful, joyful, joyful place, but there's still me speaking for God. And I can let that rush through me, and I can let that rush through me, and I can be a channel. But eventually, if that continues to happen, the channel, the fresh water of divinity will wash all the way and erode all that I am, and I will fall just like a a sugar cube into the hot tea of God. I will just dissolve into the hot tea of God, and I will just become the ocean, like Cindy was talking about. And instead of speaking, about God or speaking to God or speaking for God, I will only listen. And so we vacillate. Maybe we vacillate between these stages even within a day. You know, we we start out maybe talking, about God. And then we think, well, I should probably do some practice on my own. We speak to God. And then we find a friend comes to our door and she's broken up, and we find ourselves speaking for God. And I I I kind of fear speaking as God, to tell you the truth. And I've often felt like that's the spot where I maybe many people have a lot of resistance around, because it would require that I completely trust and allow myself to dissolve into the hot tea of God. And um, that sounds scary to the ego. And so I feel like we are approaching that together, that we are approaching that together, and that always with the Holy Spirit, we can go gently, and that there's nothing to fear. And you've probably had glimpses of it, and I probably have had glimpses of it. And it's no longer this special thing like this guy's enlightened or that guy's enlightened. I mean, it actually is um, the only direction there is to go. Today's lesson is God is my only goal. All the other doors in the hallway are beginning to not just close, but evaporate. And there's only one light at the end of the tunnel. And it's not going to decimate us, but it's going to, you know, I don't even have the words for what it's going to do. It's going to more than delight us. It's going to, I don't even have the word. So you know what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah, I do. I do. And I love that dissolve into the hot tea of God. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that.
Well, and because the Holy Spirit always speaks to me in pictures. And when that came to me, it was like, this isn't going to be scary. And when you do that, you actually, this is kind of funny, but you actually sweeten God. What? How could I sweeten God? Well, okay, I'm just going to accept that you could add sweetness to God. So I think that's a beautiful invitation. If I don't necessarily ever get to dissolving completely into the hot tea of God, at least I know that I can bring sweetness to the world in the same way that a flower brings sweetness to the world without losing anything on her own. Like she doesn't decide where that wants to be spread or extended or expressed, but rather it's just organically flows from her by the right of her consciousness and the awareness of her capital S self. So that's where we're at.
And that's what you're going to be teaching on Saturday.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
I
And
don't know about
I'm gonna
anyone listening, but I cannot wait.
and I'm gonna be using this children's book that I wrote a while ago called The Life of a Sandcastle. So it sounds, when I first got the prompt to use this, I was like, that sounds silly. Like I want to be adult and smart. It's like, no, you're going
Puzzles.
to be playful and sweet. I'm like, damn. But
You
there
like
it is.
seaweed.
Seaweed, right?
Yeah,
Seaweed.
sand castles and seaweed.
Uh-huh. Oh, yes, exactly.
Oh, thank you so much, Maureen. It sounds absolutely amazing. I think you're going to have a little bit of a guided meditation in your session as well.
Yes.
And there'll be time for conversation and questions too in your 90-minute session.
Yeah. And I
And
hope to bring us, I hope that we attempt to touch the garment of that space of as God. I hope that that could be a possibility, but at least we'll be willing to go there together and practice that presence of who we all are together. So we'll see what happens. And we don't have to wait to the conference. Play around with these concepts now
wow,
and
yeah,
then bring them with you when you come and we can enjoy them together.
great. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to come and talk to us. Looking forward to seeing you on Saturday. Thanks,
Thank
Maureen.
you. Namaste.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
God bless.
Namaste.